Hi everyone, it's Mr. Grest here, and this is lesson 5 of Unit 4. And now we're going to look more specifically at diet itself, and we're going to be looking at the terms macronutrients, micronutrients, what nutrients come under those banners. We need to describe how each nutrient affects our health and performance, so we're going back to athletic performance, and then we need to be able to explain the reason why different athletes would use them in different quantities. Right, so dealing with the two terms, a macronutrient is a nutrient that we consume in very large amounts, very large quantities in our diets, whereas a micronutrient is something that we eat in very small amounts. If we look at this image of the nutrient label for some porridge, if you look at things like carbohydrates, fats and proteins, they're displayed in actual grams, whereas when we're looking at things like sodium on there and like the vitamins and calcium and minerals at the bottom, they will be termed as micrograms or milligrams. So the macronutrients are the things we have in large quantities, and the micronutrients are some of the things we have in very small quantities. Right, for this next part, we're going to be using worksheet 4.5 in your book. So the two ways you can do this, you can either pause on every slide that we do and then fill in as you go along, or you can watch the whole summary and then have a go at seeing what you can recall at the end. So the first macronutrient we're going to look at is carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates is the primary source of energy in the body, and you may know that as sugars. Now, there's two types of carbohydrates. The complex carbohydrates, they're what's called slow release, and they're contained, as it says there, in pastas, rice, bread, things like that. Now, complex carbohydrates are things you should be eating for breakfast because it keeps you satiated for much longer. Also, in an athletic performance, you would have complex carbohydrates in your pre-match meal. So maybe a bowl of pasta or rice or bread 2 to 3 hours before you perform, and that energy will slowly release so it's ready for when you perform your race or when you have your game. Now, sugars, on the other hand, is also a type of carbohydrate, but sugars give you a very fast release of energy. So when you take a sugar like fruit, honey, sweets, Haribo, Jaffa cakes, that sort of thing, energy gels athletes use now, that energy is pretty much instantly released. So as a performer, you would want to be taking sugars either during your game, or maybe you see marathon runners as they're going along, they will take a gel during the race. You might want to take them at half time. If you're feeling low, maybe during the second half of the game, maybe you can have an energy gel, and that will give you an instant release of energy. Now, for endurance performers, they would actually need more carbohydrates than average, because the nature of endurance performance, like a marathon runner, if they're running for 2.5 hours, they need a lot of this source of energy, because carbohydrates can be burned at quite a high intensity. Now, another macronutrient is fat, and what fat does, again, it gives us energy, but it gives us energy at a much lower intensity than carbohydrates. So if you want to burn fat, you need to be working at quite a low intensity, maybe like below 60% of your maximum heart rate. Fat always provides heat for the body, as we've seen, maybe you see people with obesity or over fat, they get quite hot and sweaty because it does give us insulation, and it also allows the transport of vitamins and nutrients around the body. Now, two types of fat we've got is saturated fat, is the bad fat, and saturated fat, if we eat food high in that, burgers, things like animal fat, that fat is solid at room temperature, and it can lead to coronary heart disease and obesity because it's called a low-density lipoprotein, and it can actually build up on the walls of your arteries and cause severe cardiovascular disorder, and also develop as fat around your waist and around your organs. Now, unsaturated fat, that's like natural fats, so olive oils in nuts and things like that, that's much healthier, and that's called a high-density lipoprotein. And what that can actually do is help remove the low-density lipoproteins from the walls of the arteries, making you much healthier. But it can obviously be used for energy. But the problem we've got with fats, it requires much more oxygen to break it down. So if we're exercising with fats, we must work at a much lower intensity. So moving on to the final macronutrient of protein. What protein is? It's known as an amino acid because it helps us build muscles within our body. Now, after we've performed our exercise, so we've used those fats and those carbohydrates to fuel the exercise, there will be muscle damage. So what the protein does, it helps us build that repair, and also it can improve our immune system. Now, in terms of how much you should take, it says that endurance athletes need about 1.2 grams per kilo of their body weight post-exercise as a recovery shake or recovery meal, whereas power athletes need a little bit more. Now, the reason for that is because power athletes have worked at such a higher intensity, there will be a lot more muscle damage. Where you can get protein from are things like meat, fish, eggs. Some performers take what's called whey protein, which is a supplement that you can get from stores where you mix it with a bit of water or a little bit of milk, and that gives you the hit of protein. So it's very, very important for the repair of the muscle. Well, if we now move on to the micronutrients, so different ones that you need to know about. There's vitamins and minerals. If we start with vitamin C, now vitamin C we get from things like citrus fruits, oranges, lemons, limes, things like that. And what vitamin C does, it helps with our immune system. So in a performance perspective, if we got a good immune system, we're not going to become unwell, so we can participate to the best of our ability. Now, vitamin D we get from the sun, so that's why we encourage people getting outside. And what vitamin D does, it helps absorb calcium in the body, which makes our bones nice and strong. Now, moving on to calcium. Calcium comes from dairy products like milk, cheese, yogurts, whatever things like that. And calcium is actually stored within the bone itself to make the bones very, very strong. So if you have calcium, you're much less likely to suffer fractures or stress fractures because your bones are strong. Now, iron, we get iron from things like liver and spinach and broccoli and things like that. What iron does is hemoglobin, which is part of a red blood cell, and hemoglobin transports oxygen. So increasing iron intake actually enables us to transport more oxygen around the body. So in terms of performance, that is going to help endurance athletes transport oxygen to work aerobically to win the race. Now, fibre comes from things like beans, nuts and grains. The role of fibre in the system is to make sure as we eat, everything passes through the system. So fibre does make sure, like we go to the toilet, everything goes through. The other thing with fibre, if everything's passing through the system at a good rate, it enables all the other nutrients in there that we need to be extracted. And if we don't have fibre, we can get clogged up and get constipated, so we're unable to access the minerals, vitamins and nutrients that we need. And water, now obviously water we know is there for hydration, and the importance for hydration, if we're not hydrated we get headaches. If we become dehydrated in sport, one way we reduce blood plasma, so plasma is the fluid part of the blood, which if we take the fluid aspect off the blood, our blood becomes thicker, so it's a lot harder to pump, which again is going to affect our performance. So being hydrated allows everything in the body to work efficiently. So to summarise these points, what I'd like to do is now complete worksheet 4.5. Now 4.5 is like a mind map where it covers what is macronutrients, what is micronutrients, and then you have a section for each of the nutrients that we've talked about to say what they are, what they do, the sources of them, how they're beneficial to sportive performance. So now pause the video now, have a look at that and see what you can do. And as ever, anything you don't understand, please email your teacher.